Welcome to AccessGranted, the show that opens the door to real financial freedom through expert interviews. I'm your producer and host for the day, Anna, and every week we cut through the noise to bring you practical tools, unfiltered conversations, and strategies that will actually work so that you can build wealth on your terms. Today, we are joined by Chuck Howard, a professor who studies the psychology behind spending and consumerism. How about you tell us a little bit about yourself, your work, all of that?
My name is Chuck Howard. I'm an associate professor of marketing at the Darden School of Business, and I study consumer financial decision making.
What does that entail? Studying and actively researching consumer financial decision making.
It starts with finding out why people make bad financial decisions and then thinking about different strategies and solutions we can use to help improve their decision making, and then ultimately running experiments that test how effective those different solutions might be.
The 2024 paper titled "Why People Would Rather Clean Their Toilet Than Check Their Bank Balance and Why That Matters." That's interesting to me.
Thanks. My friend and co-author Marcel Lucas and I wrote that piece on request, actually. And long story short, what the research shows, and I want to be clear, it's actually not our research. We were summarizing mostly other people's work in that article. But what it shows is that people are least likely to pay attention to their finances when they probably should be most likely. And so when is that? Well, it's when you're in debt. It's when it feels really hard to, imagine paying off your credit card bill and so on. And of course, the less attention you're paying, the more likely it is that you continue to overspend, and that debt's going to grow and grow, and you're going to end up in, financial hot water. So that's all it is. When people know that they're going to see bad news, they're quite likely to just tune it out, not pay attention, and continue to make the same mistakes.
Why is that?
I think it's just a self-defense mechanism. It can be hard to sit down and, confront the mistakes that you have made. In some cases, if you are continuing to make those mistakes, but they're fun because you're getting enough of that psychological rush from making the impulse purchases, for example, then you might just want to avoid it altogether because you want to continue to chase the rush, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
There's almost never one thing that determines any decision, and especially bad decisions, but those are two of the things that drive people sticking their head in the sand. It's actually been labeled the ostrich effect. People just don't want to pay attention when it's bad financial news.
So it's a painful thing to look at, but it is necessary to just see where you're at in order to get yourself into a better spot.
Now, let's be honest. We live in America. You could probably get another credit card that's going to extend you another limit, but it'll be at an even higher interest rate. So, by the time you do actually look up and confront the problem, it is going to be so much worse than if you did it today. And ultimately, how you react to the bad news is somewhat within your control. So, to have a negative reaction and feel sad or even angry with yourself is totally natural. Okay. But that will pass, and it will actually pass quite quickly if you start to take action to resolve the problem. Any step you can take to get that control back will help you manage your emotions.
What do you think has been the most interesting thing that you've discovered over the course of studying behavioral economics?
So nobody's perfect. But even when we are less than perfect, we can still be better than we used to be. So to give you a very concrete example, in the work that I've done on budgeting, we see that people tend to spend much more than the budget they set. But if they set a really aggressive budget, they will spend less than they used to. So let's say last month you spend $1,000 on eating out at restaurants or delivery to your home and things like that. And so you say, okay, I really have to cut back on that. I'm going to set a tight budget. Next month, it'll only be $200. So at
Okay.
the end of the month, if you're like most people, you're probably still going to have spent like $500 or $600 going out to restaurants and ordering food to your home. Um, so is that person a failure because they spent a few $100s more than their budget, or are they a success because they spent a few $100s less than they were spending the month before? I would argue that they're on their way to being successful, and that we should celebrate the fact that they're spending less than they used to, even though they're spending way more than the budget they set for themselves. People are wildly optimistic without actually being optimistic. So, for example, people will underpredict their future expending to a large extent. They will overpredict their future income, but that's not a function of you or I necessarily being an inherently optimistic person. It's simply a function of the information that comes to mind most easily when we think about our future spending or our future earnings, and that information is incomplete. And when you stop thinking about the emergency expenses that might come up, for example, you're bound to underestimate your spending. And if for example, let's say you work freelance, and you set your own schedule, if you're not thinking about all the things that might interfere with your ability to work as much as you might want to, you're probably going to overestimate your income because you'll end up working fewer hours than you thought you would. The human mind is hardwired to be efficient, and that efficiency, largely leads us to make reasonably good decisions. But in some well-documented cases, it can lead to systematic biases, which is to say, it's very easy for me as a behavioral scientist to predict when people will make a judgment that is either too high or too low.
When it comes to the psychology of consumer spending, what are some of the things that people can be actively thinking of to try to make better decisions?
I mean, try to think of your opportunity costs. So every dollar that you spend could have been spent on something else, or it could have been saved, or it could have been invested, and so on. So if you find yourself on the verge of an impulse purchase, and you can train yourself to pause and take a step back and consider what else you could accomplish with that money, you will find over time that you just build the habit of not being so impulsive. So it's more likely when we're tired. It's more likely when we're in a social situation where there might be peer pressure. Um, it's more likely when we're confronted with a decision that we might make based on emotion rather than on reason or rationality. So, for example, if all of our friends have something and we feel like we just have to have it to, say, a particular brand of clothing, or we saw this with the Stanley Cup phenomenon a couple of years ago, all of a sudden, the decision is not being made based on what is my budget and can I afford this or do I really need it? It's based on a more emotional response of I have to have this and it's available to me now, so I'm going to get it.
That is something that I've noticed, not only doing some work in this industry and studying psychology myself, but just noticing my habits, my friends' habits, that peer pressure element, that social pressure to spending is really big. And I think that from what I've seen, can sometimes get worse as you start earning more, because when you have more money, there's more of that social pressure around you to try to keep up that lifestyle.
I think that's probably true as people graduate college and their earnings increase pretty rapidly over the first, say, 10 years of their career. I do think it probably plateaus over time. Like at some point, you're making enough money that it becomes less about impulse purchasing and more about managing your finances wisely. But there's a lot of variation, right? That's one of the most interesting things about studying financial decision making is that everybody does it a little bit differently.
That's one of the trickiest things I think about having your budget, especially with being online, is the amount of things you see on social media, different in-app purchases. When you're like scrolling through Instagram and you see a thing you like, you can click on the thing you like and you can buy it instantly.
Mhm.
Is there what why do you think that is that drives people to do that, even though they know it's not in the budget, they know they probably shouldn't be doing it, but it's right there and they do it anyways?
I mean, when you make something really easy to do, people are quite likely to do it. So it's a little bit fun, right? We all get a little bit of a rush when we buy something that feels like something we want or something we need.
Is it that like
And
dopamine or adrenaline or all of that stuff? You're
it's
just happy because you're doing
the
it.
the brain's reward center will light up a little bit, and that reward feels good, even if it's subconsciously. And marketers know that, companies know that, and so they make it as easy as possible for consumers to get that little rush. And that is a big part why people end up overspending. Some of it is frankly just being unaware. So not tracking your spending carefully and not realizing that you're about to go over budget or that you're already over budget. But mostly it's about that psychological rush you get, and companies making it easy as possible for you to get that.
That's really where money starts leaking away. It's that like $5 purchase there that doesn't seem like a big deal because it could be worse. It's not a $500 purchase, it's a $5 purchase or a $20 purchase. And if you make a number of those a week, you end up with these numbers that are way out of your budget that you didn't know where they came from. Are there any like tools or tricks that you've seen people use or studied or have had colleagues study to sort of help rein that in a little bit, especially with how online everything is right now?
You just need to set aside, say, 20 minutes once a week. Maybe it's only 5 minutes. It totally depends on how much money you're spending and what you're buying. But if once a week you check in on your spending, review how much you've spent, compare that against a budget you've set for yourself, I can guarantee you will end up spending less money.
So it seems like a lot of the psychology behind impulse spending and spending in general can be mitigated by having a budget and making sure that you're keeping track of it and in check with it, because you can't necessarily control what's going on inside of your brain, right? A lot of that is automatic.
A lot of it is automatic, cannot control your brain's natural response. But once you know what your brain's natural response is to different situations, you can choose to make decisions in the situations that are best for your financial health. So, for example, we feel really good when we're online and we click that button on Instagram and we buy that new pair of jeans that we think are going to look really good. So we get that psychological rush. Well, in contrast to that, if you set a budget at the start of the month and you sit down on Sunday night to track your spending over the past week, and you see that you're already on track to go way over budget, you will have this in the same way you got the psychological rush from the purchase, you will have a psychological pain point from seeing that you're going to go over budget. And the key is to just balance those two things. You don't always want to feel awful every time you make a purchase, but you do definitely want to pause, take a step back, and understand which purchases are really worth it. And that is what I mean by learning to control the psychological response by understanding which things will make you feel which way and then being strategic.
That is a very good point. You can't control necessarily the impulses, but once you know what they are going to be and you know how your brain works, you can work around it and you understand sort of how to not necessarily fix the problem, but mitigate it and work with yourself in order to make healthier decisions instead of constantly battling what your natural response is to do.
That's it. It's It has a lot to do with habit building. And I think financial health and making wise financial decisions is not so different than physical health and trying to make wise decisions around when to work out and what foods to eat and so on. If you build good habits, especially early in you're starting your career and you're starting to get a decent paycheck, you will carry those habits with you for the rest of your life, and you will be much, much better off financially as a result.
That's actually really funny that you use that workout analogy. You're not the first person we've talked to about finances and budgeting to use that analogy. I think it's a really powerful one, and it's one that a lot of people can relate to. It's not easy to build wealth, and it's not easy to work around some of these natural impulses that we have.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, I think, one thing that's worth considering for the people out there listening and watching at home is that I think social media and media in general sort of feeds us this prototype of the lone wolf. So if you're thinking about a fitness influencer, for example, it's probably one person who's at the gym doing something insane. And you see that and you go to the gym and you try to do it and it's really hard and you're also by yourself. And so it doesn't end up sticking, right? But if you look out in the world in reality and who is most successful at staying fit, for the most part, it's people that are making it a social activity. So maybe it's going to a CrossFit gym where you work out with like the same 6 or 8 or 10 people. Maybe it's playing sports on a team. Can be anything, but having that social reinforcement and encouragement is really helpful. And I think a lot of people overlook how powerful that can be when we're talking about financial decision making. So if you can open up a conversation with a small group of friends or maybe your family, whoever you are close to, and make it fun, like make a bit of a competition
Mm-hmm.
around who's going to be able to save and invest the most money this month, this quarter, this year, that can be beneficial because all of a sudden now it's not you just ruminating, alone at your kitchen table at like midnight on a Sunday. It's something that you can have a conversation about. And, for anybody out there who's in a long-term committed relationship, especially if you're married, have that conversation with your spouse. There's research showing that will lead to a better relationship, just generally speaking, by having that transparency, but also that it will improve your financial decision making.
So, just like social influence and social pressure can be a very negative thing when it comes to spending and finances, you can use it to help you do better. And you can use it to your advantage because that is something that as humans we're wired to. We like that social reinforcement.
And this is calling back to what you said earlier about understanding the brain's natural psychological response and being strategic about how you chase that response. So if you're going to chase a rush in one situation and buy something because it's popular with your friends, why not try to create a similar rush with a group of friends who are having an open conversation about saving and investing and being financially smart about their futures. When you enjoy success and, see your money grow over time, believe me, it feels just as good and many times much, much better than whatever, small rush you would have
Mm-hmm.
got for making that Instagram purchase.
So, as far as actionable tips to working around the psychology of spending, it's really just understanding the psychology behind spending, understanding why we're doing the things that we're doing, and working to find a way to get that same effect, but in a more helpful, useful way.
Right. That's it. If you could go out to the bar on a Saturday night and drink your face off and get a psychological reward for that in some sense, maybe not on Sunday morning, but in the moment, you're going to have some psychological reaction to that could be positive. But you know what? You will get the same rush if you go to the gym. And so I'm not saying that people should always go to the gym and never go out and have a drink. I'm not saying people should never buy something on Instagram and only save 100% of their money all of the time. But I do think, well, I know that if people can find a way to strike a balance, they're going to live a better life and be in better financial and physical health for that matter.
I know managing emotions with in any situation can be tricky. What are some things you would recommend to people that they can do to help them have more of a not necessarily positive outlook, but be able to just give them a better sense that everything's going to be okay, to manage that sometimes natural sense of, oh my gosh, what is going on? What have I done?
For me, when I was in that position many years ago, it was really helpful to realize that I wasn't alone. A lot of people make these mistakes, and a lot of people make them when they are young, in their early 20s, even into their early 30s. And heck, some people continue to make them much longer than that. So for me, there was some benefit to understanding that what I was doing was not uncommon. And then the big piece for me was trying to take steps that help me control the situation. So, immediately, what can I do today to make sure that that credit card balance isn't going up or isn't going up more than it has to?
Mm-hmm.
And then tomorrow, what can I do to make sure that I'm paying that balance down at the end of the month to the extent that that is possible? A lot of people focus exclusively on cutting spending. And so it becomes this sort of, you know, austere existence of, eating ramen noodles and never going out to see your friends. And, it doesn't hurt to cut back on your spending. That is a good thing. I would suggest that to people who are in debt. But I also encourage people to think about ways to increase their income. And I think that's often a secondary thought for people.
Mm-hmm.
It's never been easier to have a gig or a side hustle where you can earn some extra money, evenings, weekends, whatever. And, if you are already in a full-time career, well, start to think about what the next step is going to be. Think about, what the financial reward will be if you can come up with a way to get that next promotion a few months earlier than you might have got it otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's something a lot of people forget about, that increasing your income, especially when you feel like you're making a lot, or for those higher earners out there who are already making quite a bit of money, but more could help. More could push them to get into an even better financial spot. And I think that's an important thing to remember, that that is an option out there. There's ways to, even if you don't have time for a side gig, you can try to find a better paying job in your field, or you can work with your company to try to get a promotion. There's a lot of options out there. And again, I think for people who are earning higher incomes and feel like they should be okay, it's not a one size fits all situation. Maybe you do need to be making a little bit more. And there's ways you can go about doing that without completely driving yourself insane.
Yeah. And, it's worth pointing out that financial fragility can happen at any point on the income spectrum. So we often associate it with being low income, and younger and earlier in your career. But there are plenty of people who earn a really good living who still live with financial fragility because maybe they don't have an emergency savings buffer, and then they encounter a large healthcare expense, let's say. So it's mandatory they have to pay it, but they don't have money in the bank to cover it. And all of a sudden now, even somebody who's making six figures is living paycheck to paycheck. So it's not just low income people that are in this situation. So anybody and everybody should consider ways to decrease spending, but also increase income.
Before we sign off for the day, is there anything about consumer psychology or the psychology of spending that you think is important for people to know that I haven't touched on, or any final words for the audience?
Take the big picture view. Where do you want to be a year from now, 5 years from now, 50 years from now? maybe don't think so much about who you are as much as who you want to be and what it's going to take to get there. And, I think that can help a lot of people improve their financial decision making.
Well, thank you so much for coming on this call and talking with me about your work, the psychology of spending. I think it's a topic that often gets overlooked when you're looking at budgeting and spending in debt. So thank you again for coming on our show. We really appreciate it.
The pleasure was all mine, Anna. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you again for joining us, and thank all of you for watching this episode of Access Granted. We're so happy to have you here with us. Remember to subscribe to our channel, subscribe to our newsletter at wearenoyak.com, and please don't forget to check the description for those links to Chuck's work. It is very important and a very interesting thing for you to keep track of as you go throughout your spending in your day-to-day life. And we will see you next time.